thank you to Black Agenda Report for your steadfastness in the face of lies and your courage to speak truth to power. And thank you, Bruce Dixon, for your love of the people. Even when your own life was on the line, you didn't give up. We will forever appreciate you. I'm going to speak on the topic, a left that is worthy of black folk and the working class. The title suggests that we do not have such a left. We are in, as all of us here know, a crisis of unparalleled magnitude. It is a crisis of the state, a crisis of state monopoly rule, and of the liberal mechanisms through which the monopoly financial bourgeoisie rule this country. The crisis is also a crisis of legitimacy. All the major institutions of bourgeois rule are declared to be illegitimate by the people. To quote Lenin, he said, "This is a crisis defined by the fact that the ruling class cannot rule in the old way, and the working class will not be ruled in the old way." For Lenin, this defined a revolutionary situation because he assumed, as was the case, the presence of a revolutionary left led by a revolutionary party, the Bolshevik Party. The crisis of bourgeois rule is not yet in this country a revolutionary crisis. However, it is a crisis of bourgeois rule. At the same time, simultaneously, this crisis is also a crisis of the left. Interestingly, a crisis of bourgeois rule is also a crisis of the American left. Perhaps a situation that few other societies have experienced. This crisis flows from the fact that the white-dominated left and the black left several decades ago turned their backs on black folk, the black proletariat, and the working class in general, instead turning to the politics of intersectionality, identity, difference, and Afrocentrism. How did the left come to be associated with petty bourgeois, pro-imperialist, pro-war, even counter-revolutionary ideas, and still claim to be left? How and when did Nietzsche, Heidegger, Foucault, probably names you never heard of, Derrida and Lacan, all famous white Europeans, replace Marx, Lenin, Du Bois, Baldwin, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Mao, and Fidel? Why and when did black thinkers and activists reject the great black freedom movement and the anti-colonial struggles in Asia and Africa? When did black thinkers start to mimic their white academic counterparts? When did left thinkers separate racial oppression from class exploitation? When did gender become a separate category, distinct from other oppressions in a capitalist society? When did individualism and careerism replace the selflessness so characteristic of black leadership throughout the centuries, and the fight for the collective good? When did individualism take over? A good place to start, perhaps ironically, is in Paris in 1968, We might also say Chicago in 1968. Out of the so-called failure of the French working class to support the student movement came ideas about the failure of workers to fight for the future. And therefore, the petty bourgeoisie had to go its own way. And thus ideas that today define much of the intellectual and academic landscape of the United States began to be fomented. And that's why I mentioned the name of Foucault and Derrida and Lacan and so many others. I know their names. I don't understand what they're talking about. But I do know this, that when we see in our country so many intellectuals who claim to be left saying that identity trumps class, that gender and sexuality trumps race, class, and the proletariat, we have to look to that moment. And hence, the whole notion that one can be left and anti-communist at the same time was crystallized in this moment in French and then ultimately American intellectual history, heralding the fact that the petty bourgeois intellectual, which we now know, separated from a great movement, usually goes in one direction, and that is not towards the revolution, but towards its opposite. Not towards a movement of peace, but towards the support of imperialism. This anti-communist left, sometimes called the anti-Stalinist left, has been defined so broadly that it includes everyone from Hillary Clinton to Bernie Sanders to Biden and anybody else that is not Trump. An issue that I want to return to. While workers are immiserated, unions busted, communities gentrified, wars for resources estimated now to have cost upwards of $8 trillion. While all this is going on, the left in name cease to talk about peace and anti-imperialism or the exploitation of workers, or for that matter, the banks. Again, talk about sexuality, gender, a certain way of talking about race that does not threaten racial arrangements under capitalism, and certainly the abandonment of any discussion of class, interestingly, at a time when workers, irrespective of race and ethnicity and language, are looking more socially the same. When workers in West Virginia, be they in the mines or teachers on strike, look more like, think more like, and act like black workers in Detroit striking against General Motors. The so-called left intelligentsia has abandoned workers, period, and has smeared the working class generally as racist, and for the non-white, side of it homophobic, misogynist, xenophobic. All claims that find no verification outside of the claims of some academic who is authorized by a group of tenured professors and a university administration somewhere far removed from the working class, and probably a university that is gentrifying a black neighborhood nearby. It is this group of intellectuals that then claim the moral high ground because they got the right language. Word games replace the real game of struggle. While many of these intellectuals, better yet academics, and there's a difference, the intellectual and the artist has heart. And like Paul Robeson, they asked the question, what side are you on? For an academic, you don't have to take a side. In fact, you are rewarded for not taking a side, and if you're black, for attacking black people, especially the great leaders of the great black movement that, well, I won't say more. Within the comfortable fold of a university, a think tank, or a high-priced academic, scholar, media personality, they condemn the black poor, but condemn the black poor not just in words, but through their indifference. The greatest moral sin is not what you say, it's what you don't say when somebody should speak up. To sit on a faculty at a university like Columbia, Temple, or University of Pennsylvania and be black and never say anything about gentrification, never say anything about the fact that the faculty is damn near all white except for you tokens, and everybody cleaning the toilets and serving the food and making minimum wage and below is black and brown, and you have nothing to say about that because you are working on your latest project, a book on Toni Morrison. While unimagined suffering and death fomented by imperialist wars, economic sanctions in Asia, the Mideast, and Africa go forward, and this is real violence, academics and those involved in identity politics want to talk about the violence of the language of the working class against them. So now, the truth is that when they have no program for the proletariat, the nominal left, the self-defined left, says that their tactical and strategic objective is to take over the Democratic Party. The Democratic Socialists of America and the Communist Party USA have made it their, quote, progressive duty to restore the Democratic Party to what it was under Franklin D. Roosevelt. The only problem with the tactic and strategy is the time of Franklin D. Roosevelt is not the time that we are living in. The crisis of the system is far greater. On the other extreme of the left, organizations like the International Socialist Organization and other Trotskyist sects have folded, many of them joining the DSA. In general, there's not a united left in the United States, and sadly, and we all must take a certain responsibility for this, worthy of black people. When I say worthy of black people, I'm talking about worthy of the great struggle waged by black people, which was crystallized probably in that greatest moment of our history, what we call the civil rights movement, what the participants called the Black Freedom Movement. And it was a Black Freedom Movement, and to call it that is to align it with all of the freedom movements of the middle of the 20th century, India, China, Africa, Latin America, the Cuban Revolution. We do not have a left worthy of that, nor a left worthy of the working class. And here I'd like to make my point perfectly clear. If you're not worthy of black people, you're not worthy of working people, because black people are in their vast majority workers. We are working poor. Black leftists seem ashamed of black folk, ashamed that they don't believe in what the elite intelligentsia believe in, don't accept their lifestyle, and resent these so-called intellectuals attempting to dictate to poor black working people how they should live. Now, as an intellectual, you might believe that the religion of the people is the opiate of those people, but they don't believe that. They don't believe that for one moment. They believe that their religion is part of their salvation, part of the education of their hearts, setting moral boundaries about what is right and wrong and how we move forward as a people. The truth of the matter is that some of the greatest leaders ever produced in this country come out of various religions. This being ashamed of Martin Luther King because he was a Christian, the question, but not being ashamed of Foucault, or Derrida, or Heidegger, or Nietzsche. It's a double standard. What leftist worth his or her, I was going to say weight in gold, worth anything, would turn their back on the black church? Let us not forget the African Methodist Episcopal Church was founded in a struggle against white supremacy. There are few on the left who are the equals of Richard Allen or Absalom Jones. Can we forget that the great Muhammad Ali comes out of the Nation of Islam? And whether you like them or not, there are many black people who owe their lives to the Nation of Islam, especially those who were in prison and on heroin. Forgive me for, it is a bit emotional. Afraid that black folk don't believe what they believe. These black leftists, unconnected elites, think they got everything to teach the masses of black people, the proletariat, as Du Bois called them, and nothing to learn. A left unable to see the connection between, again, the mainly white teachers striking in West Virginia or Oregon and the mainly black auto workers in Detroit. That's basic. Let me just conclude with this. How do we explain this moment? A great crisis of the ruling class. The question arises, a ruling class that cannot rule, but a left that cannot seize the moment. A great contradiction. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., the historian and public intellectual, said that American politics pivots upon the vital center, the living center. What happens when the center collapses? And as we are faced with today, two extremes, primarily within the ranks of the ruling class, fight it out, and there is no compromise. It's a zero-sum game. And that's what we're looking at. In a world where the West is in decline and Asia is ascending. A geostrategic situation never before confronted by Western capitalism. The Soviet Union presented an ideological and military opposition to the West. But China and the China-Russia-Iran alliance presents a technological superior, economic system superior challenge to the West. But in the United States, the people are crying out for an alternative to this system of rule. But no one has yet come forward to answer their cry. The left, and here I want to talk primarily about the black left, because that is really the left. And the reason the black left is the left, because we have a people that have always been open to revolutionary ideas in ways that no other part of this population has been. Always. And you look at the black radical tradition, all that we have produced in art, in ideas, in music, world historic. You win the black community, you win the day. Unite the white proletariat, not all of them, you're never going to get all of them until you take power, but enough, 20%, with black people mobilized in a crisis like this. That would be the balance. The ruling class cannot rule. So you have a black left that betrayed the masses. The great betrayal. And there are two parts of it. First is Obama.
That's right. Tell it. Make them clap.
Obama. That wasn't a hard one to see coming. Which meant that you were posing as left and radical, but you were waiting to sell out all the time. You never had any other intentions but selling out. But the second, and this is a little more difficult because it's closer to us, the anti-Trump so-called resistance. The other great betrayal. You didn't have to go into that. That is a Democratic Party, CIA, deep state, FBI alliance. Not for the sake of defeating fascism. I know I said to Don DeBar, he said, well, Trump is a fascist. I said, if Trump is a fascist, then what does that make Hillary? And I didn't mean that in a sarcastic way. But this is an alliance for the purpose of restoring U.S. imperialism on a world scale. You don't have to be a genius to understand that Trump has disrupted them. And why would any leftist oppose that? I mean, I don't understand it. Unless you are part of the system that is oppressing all workers. We need a left. Whether it takes the form of a party, and at this point I don't think it will, but we need a left that is a movement for peace and justice and against imperialism. We need a left that acknowledges the central role of the working class in general and the black proletariat in particular. We need a left that is prepared to live in communities among the poor, going to churches, political meetings, and unions. We need a left that is worthy of black people and of the working class in general. That is the task before us. We need a left that understands this moment, a left that can set its agenda and take its agenda and program to the people. Without that, we will enter a period, sadly, which will be a dark ages for our people and for all of us. But the world will move forward. Anti-imperialism is ascendant. China and Asia, and if Asia rises, so will Africa. And if Africa rises in alliance with Asia, it will be, whether we want it or not, the end of imperialism as it has been known. Thank you very much.